everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your filthy casual place for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I am DylanLasagna, and welcome to a series of episodes. The first of what is to be a few of series of episodes for what is one of my favorite times of what is the NFL offseason, and pretty much one of my favorite times of the year for the podcast, and that is NFL season recap month. The one time of the year where we get to sit down and, revisit the season that was the 2022 NFL season. So kick back, relax, watch, listen, however you're consuming Very Cold Lasagna, because we're going to go back in time. We're going back, Bagel, to recap all 31 teams and their seasons, their stories, and their journeys in this very wacky NFL season. So you're probably wondering, if you're a first-time listener, if you're a first-time viewer, you're probably wondering, what? There's 32 teams. There are 32 teams in the NFL. Why only 31? Why are we missing one team specifically? Well, if you go back, if you listen to my podcast, I already reviewed one team. I already did a season recap of one team, and that's my team, my personal team, my favorite team, the San Francisco 49ers. I did a whole shebang recap of their season after, like a week after they lost the NFC Championship game, just like I did last year when I debuted season recap month. I first did the 49ers last year, and then there you go. That's why we're doing 31 teams last year. That's why we're doing all 31 teams this year. Again, after I reviewed the 49ers 2022 season. So, that's basically where we're at with the season recaps. So, pretty much how it's going to go this time around is pretty much how it went last year. We're going to start off with the worst to the best in the draft order. Obviously, that excludes my 49ers. When it came to the final three, final four, and then we're gonna divide up each episode into, I'd say, about five or six, like last year. Obviously, like with the worst and the best of however many teams there are in this weird conjoined up order. So, stick around. Make sure you grab something to eat, something to drink, to consume. And before we start, I'd like to know how your team has done this past season and what you think your team should do in the offseason, whether it's the Bears, the Lions, the Chiefs, the reigning defending Chiefs. We're going to be talking about all these teams in the next month or so in these episodes of Very Cold Lasagna. I would love to know what your guys' personal thoughts are, however you can. And to do so, make sure you comment, share, like the video if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're not, if you're listening to the audio side of things, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, Google Podcasts, make sure to rate and review it. And follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna, where you can also send me a message there, leaving your thoughts on the show. So, that being said, let's get right into our 2022 NFL season recaps, starting with the worst of the worst. Yes, that is right, ladies and gentlemen. These are the 6 worst teams in the NFL. The top 6 picking in the NFL draft because they sucked that much. They landed into the filth. They were the 6 teams that were just in the terribleness of terrible. They landed straight into dumpster town. The inductees for the straight trash, the straight dumpster fire this year. So, who were those 6 teams? Who were just that bad that they landed into dumpster town? Let's find out. Starting with the one team that won it all by losing so much. what better way to kick off NFL season recap month here on Very Cold Lasagna with the team that was just so bad. They know how to play the game well. And of course, it's a team that played another good old year of, say it with me now, say it loud and proud, Bears football. Hell yeah, Maggle. Bears football. The Chicago Bears were so bad. They were so incompetent. They were just that damn bad in 2022. They were the worst team in the NFL. So for the Chicago Bears, it was just that kind of year. You thought 2021 was bad, where they went, I believe it was like 5-11, 5-12. I forgot they added the 18 game season by then. Oh no, 6-11. My apologies. 6-11. And then it turned out exactly how I envisioned back in July. A much worse year of Bears football. So this is a great place to start. This really is a great place to start. So let's rewind back to July. Chicago came into the 2022 season. They have a new regime in general manager Ryan Poles. Head coach Matt Eberflus came in. And, you know, both of them had some experience in their past roles. But for those two, it was the first time in their respective roles. And this was like they were kind of going into a semi-important offseason because unlike with Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, the previous regime, they didn't know what the hell they were doing, especially when it came to the then rookie quarterback, Justin Fields, whom Ryan Pace drafted. And going into this season, 2022, the goal for this year was to not only protect quarterback Justin Fields because he was sacked so much in 2021, but it was also to see how Justin Fields would develop meaningfully this past year in 2022. So to do that, general manager Ryan Poles needed to provide at least some ample support that Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy didn't give. Solid receivers and at least some kind of pass protection. But with the bad contracts of the last regime and, well, some kind of inaction on the current one, they didn't do such. They didn't do that. And of course, it precluded to what was to come in the regular season. And you all know what happened in the regular season. I can say it so much. I want to save my energy for it. Okay? I want to save my energy for it. So the Bears actually, you know, they won their first they won their first few games, okay? They actually deceived everyone by starting 2-1. They actually beat my 49ers in a downpour. That what do you call it? That kind of weather. It was just very bad weather. Very rainy weather where Niners fans were giving so many excuses about the rain and how Trey Lance couldn't throw in the rain, but yet Justin Fields could. Justin Fields was able to throw in the rain. And then the next week after, they decided to get the pudding pounded on them by their owner, their daddy, Aaron Rodgers in the Packers. That somehow still is on Sunday night because rivalry, man. And then the next week, they proceed to just barely beat the Texans. Their old friend, Lovie Smith. Just barely. So right after that, you know, they endured on a 3-game losing streak before they upset the New England Patriots on Monday night, somehow, some way, which is more so of the Patriots embarrassing themselves. And then they lost out the rest of the way. The Bears actually were in plenty position to win games, but they either fell short of their comebacks or they allowed comebacks to happen. They were not a very, very good team of, you know, doing one or the other. Offensively, you know, this team was so heavy reliant on Justin Fields' newfound rushing ability that when it came time for him to throw the damn ball, he was barely anywhere to be found. Like, sure, he can throw the ball. He can actually throw a solid mid-range ball and a good deep ball too, but it's just like his decision making. is kind of questionable, and he holds on to the ball for too long still, that he gets sacked or he uses his legs a little too much. Blame can be placed, yes, on both Justin Fields, but a lot of blame could also be placed on the offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy. Who do some people call him? Gutless Getsy? Yeah, I think that's a good name for that. I like that name. Whoever gets credit for that. Because, well, his play calling was really bad in a lot of situations. Meanwhile, the offensive line was still a bad unit, but a few of their linemen were still pretty okay. Not slightly as bad as last year's, which was pretty terrible. But they still allowed Justin Fields to get sacked a lot. They were nearly dead last defensively because of the lack of the pass rush, and it didn't help any further when they traded Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn mid-season. But I mean, at least you got those fat contracts out of the way, and you have a pretty bad secondary unit that couldn't net many turnovers during the season. So as such, that's why you lost the last 10 of their games. And they were blown out in their final 3 with the injuries piling up, including to Justin Fields. So, yeah, positively, though, they did end their season on the most highest of notes. They got what they wanted with being the worst of the worst. They were losing that much and in such poor fashion that they managed to keep pace with the Houston Texans for the first overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. They were playing so much Bears football when the time came around in week 18, when they were getting their asses whooped by the Minnesota Vikings and their backups. Not only did they lose to the Vikings, but their old friend, the same head coach that they beat in week 3, Lovie Smith, who knew he was going to get fired by Houston, he fucked over the Texans. He fucked them over so hard. He won them the game. He coached his ass off. He coached his team to win against the Colts. And he gifted Chicago the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. He said, fuck you, Houston. I'm giving the number 1 overall pick to my good old Chicago Bears. And that's where they are now. Bears football ultimately reigns supreme for the Bears. So overall, yeah, it was a pretty shitty season for Chicago, but in the end, they seized the day with Lovie Smith returning the depth. But in the end, overall, still for Chicago, when you look at some aspects of it, I'd say Justin Fields, he had an okay season, at least from a rushing perspective, but you have to have some questions about how he is as an actual pure passer. Like I said, he can actually throw a good deep ball, but his decision making and actually trying to get rid of the ball at a very quicker pace, it can still raise some concerns. He still holds onto the ball for a long while. Meanwhile, for Matt Eberflus, the head coach, he makes some really weird decisions. He plays a mostly conservative approach at a lot of the times, and his offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, gets too comfortable in letting Justin Fields be Lamar Jackson 2.0. But hey, this whole team got what they wanted. They played the best Bears football they got all year long and were rewarded with the number 1 overall pick. And now they hold all the cards in terms of what they want to do with it, whether they want to get the best player available or trade down the draft order and get a whole bevy of picks with it. So going into this offseason, it's another important one for the Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus regime, because now in this offseason, compared to the last one, you actually do have a shit ton of money to spend. You have around $97 million to go with from offloading those fat contracts from Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn. And honestly, you can break the bank as long as you spend it wisely, because looking at your key free agents, you have a lot of unrestricted free agents, but none of them did anything positive. So it's hard to imagine the Bears keeping any of them unless you want some reserve pieces. And looking at some of the things they have to address this offseason, it's a lot. It is a lot for a team trying to rebuild itself, trying to stay relevant, and especially a team that's trying to get a new stadium in Chicago. So they have to address everything on defense, like getting a pass rushing unit back, especially after trading Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn. They just need just about everything. And the secondary needs a lot of help too, with corner Kyler Gordon and free safety Jaquan Brisker being the only two decent standouts in that unit. But man, that defense really needs a lot of help. The offense needs a good amount of help too. For Justin Fields too, he needs help. The two biggest priorities has to be receiver and the offensive line. They did trade for Chase Claypool for a second round pick. I don't know why they did that, but Claypool didn't provide a spark to the offense, like at all. Like Darnell Mooney and Chris St. Brown, like Amon-Ra St. Brown's brother. I mean, they were okay, but they're not really they're not that number one option that Justin Fields needs. So they need to get a number one option. I think their best bet is the draft, or maybe they could still steal one in free agency. The Bears really got to focus in though on getting and beefing up the offensive line, especially the interior and right tackle position. It's been exposed greatly for the last 2 years, allowing so many sacks on Justin Fields. And I think the Bears could also use another backup running back behind Khalil Herbert, because he had an injury-riddled 2022. And I do think, though, one of the biggest things that they need to do before free agency starts is decide what they want to do with the top pick. Do they want to actually use it, or do they want to trade down? Because there is going to be at least one team that's going to be desperate enough to trade a bunch load of their future picks to package up with their current pick to get a quarterback. You have teams like the Indianapolis Colts. You have teams like the Raiders. You have teams like the Panthers that want to trade up, get their franchise quarterback, and settle in, lock in for the future. And the Bears have all the cards to play in deciding what they want to do and how to determine the first round of the NFL draft. So the Bears can play all the cards. It's just a matter of how they want to do it. So overall, I mean, the Bears' new regime didn't set themselves up for 2022, which obviously led to an even worse year of, say it with me now, Bears football. But hey, like I said, countless times, they sold at the trade deadline. They gave themselves a huge amount of money to spend this offseason. And now, I also forgot to mention this fact. Their team president, at least their former one, and Ted Phillips, is finally gone. So some Bears fans are finally rejoicing. And then they got a new team president in a former Big Ten commissioner, Kevin Warren, who seems like he's going to be knowing what he's doing. And as long as he lets Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus do what they need to do on the football side, then maybe Chicago will have a little bit of hope for next season and play a little bit less of, let's say it one more time, one last time, Bears football. So next up, we have the 2022 Houston Texans. Now, going into this 2022, many people were wondering, well, the Texans had themselves a pretty headline-worthy offseason, but for all the wrong reasons. And, well, after a dumpster fire 4-13 2021 season, people were wondering, well, it couldn't have gone worse for them, right? Right? Well, it actually kind of did. They fired David Culley, their one-and-done head coach, after one season. And rather than find a more modern candidate, a more decent candidate that was more qualified, they promoted from within. They named their defensive coordinator, Lovie Smith, the new head coach. Now, keep in mind, this Texans organization almost considered a former quarterback who has had no prior head coaching experience, or let alone coaching experience at all, in Josh McCown. Yeah, keep that in mind. They almost hired Josh McCown to be the head coach of the Houston Texans. But hell, that's not the craziest story we're going to have later on when it comes to head coaches in the NFL. But, just like the prior offseason, GM Nick Caserio only got the bargain bin of free agents, but, he did more of his dirty work in the draft. He got potential pieces like LSU corner Derek Singletary Jr., Texas A&M tackle Kenyon Green, and Alabama receiver John Mechie. But unfortunately for Mechie, he didn't play this season due to leukemia. Prayers up that he is recovering. Hopefully he's doing better to this day. Hopefully it will be in remission. I don't know if it is, but hopefully it will be at some point. The Texans did find themselves in the heat of the then ongoing Deshaun Watson scandals during the point of the offseason. Reports were coming out that they allowed Watson to do what he was doing, which was really pretty bad on their part. But still, they managed to trade Watson to the Cleveland Browns for a large handful of picks, which included 3 first-round picks. And at least for the Texans, they got Deshaun Watson off their backs. The problem is they had the stench of him in the organization still because, well, everyone knew now that they pretty much allowed it to happen. So, yikes. But aside from all that, despite all of that, the ultimate goal for the Texans this season, you have a new head coach in Lovie Smith. You pretty much have a new staff. You got a couple of decent pieces, but you want to find out whether your second-year starter in Davis Mills from Stanford could be a potential long-term option for Houston. But safe to say that you couldn't really figure that out because the Texans' talent gap was just so wide that you really couldn't figure out that answer. Because, yeah, like I said, the Texans' talent gap was very wide. It showed in just about every way. Davis Mills was very inconsistent throughout the season. One game, he would look very solid. The next game, he'd be overthrowing his receivers. His inconsistency led to him to get benched for a few games. Kyle Allen would come in, start a couple games, and then Lovie Smith realized Allen was way worse. And then Lovie Smith decided to use this weird combination of Davis Mills and Kyle Allen in games. Like, what the hell? Like, he would swap out his quarterbacks, after each series. Like, what? Like, that's not how you, that's how you pretty much ruin the chemistry on offense. If there was chemistry on offense in Houston. But anyway, the offensive line, outside of tackle Laramie Tunsil, and I'd say Kerryon Green did okay, was still one of the worst in the league. They couldn't pass block. They couldn't run block. They couldn't provide open run links for shit. Their defense allowed an average of at least 20 points each game, despite the additions of Steven Nelson and Derek Stingley Jr. They can't do it by themselves. But Stingley missed the second half of the season due to injury. But despite being able to create a solid amount of turnovers, despite being able to, tackle okay-ish, the secondary could never turn those turnovers into points, at least on offense. And then, well, when it came to the actual results on the field, they managed to tie in week 1 against the Colts in a game that neither team looked like they wanted to win. The Texans went on to lose their next 3. They beat the Jaguars in a game they also didn't look like they didn't want to win. And then they went on to lose their next 10 of 11 games. They seemed destined to get that number 1 overall pick. I think I picked the Houston Texans to be the worst team in the NFL because they were just that talent deficient. They were just that bad going into the season because they literally had nobody. on that team, aside from maybe Derek Stingley, maybe potentially like if Davis Mills had showed something decent. But what they did was to lose that number 1 overall pick somewhere leading up to week 18. Somewhere leading up to week 18, I guess Lovie Smith, I guess he knew he was going to get the shit can. But when he learned he was going to get the shit can, he decided to stick it to the Houston Texans. He decided to say, you know what? Fuck you, Houston. I'm going to take my ball. I'm going to walk onto that field in Indianapolis, and I'm going to have my team play to win. I'm going to have them play to win against the Indianapolis Colts. And that's exactly what he did. They initially blew a double-digit lead to Jeff Saturday's Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis, and the Texans' dumbasses went on to come back and win a useless final game and cost themselves the number 1 overall pick to the Chicago Bears. That's the Houston Texans for you, ladies and gentlemen. So unlike last season, where with David Culley, there's basically no happiness, basically no happy ending, no optimism for this season under Lovie Smith, because this season was basically all about the tank for next year. But then they fucked up the tank at the end, thanks to Lovie Smith effing over the Texans because he knew he was going to get fired. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to get fired. So fuck the organization. I'm going to screw you all in the ass. So he ends the Texans end the season with a 3-13-1 record. I will say though, there were very few small positives. That one of those positives included you had at least some potential in rookie running back Dameon Pierce, who was basically the Thomas the Tank Engine for that Texans offense. He was pretty good with the open running lanes given to him, and he actually created some himself. Safety Jalen Peter, that's how you pronounce his name. He's shown flashes along with Derek Stingley Jr. in what was an otherwise putrid secondary. And one positive came in the Texans' early offseason, just a couple of days at the end of January. The Texans decided to settle on former 49ers defensive coordinator and former teammate DeMeco Ryans. So I personally don't agree with Ryans going to a crappy organization in the Texans, but hey, he has many ties to them. He's played there before. He's a good leader of men. He knows how to rally his troops, as many Niners fans have seen before. He knows how to he knows how to build a defense over there. He knows how to call really good defensive plays. And if he's just given ample amount of time to help rebuild not just the roster, but the culture over there, and not these one and done situations like Lovie Smith and David Culley have had, and maybe Houston can finally be a somewhat, ever so slightly decent organization, maybe in several years. I don't know. But hey, all I know is that the McNair family are getting a shitload of money to make DeMeco Ryans try out this rebuild thing. Damn. 6 years. A 6-year contract, huh? Oh man, I hope DeMeco Ryans is ready for it. So anyway, obviously for the Texans, they have a big offseason ahead of them. They got about $37 million to spend. Fortunately for them, if they want to take this rebuild seriously, they don't have that many key free agents to worry about. All they have is O.J. Howard, the tight end, outside linebacker Ogbonia Koronkwo, and center Scott Quisenberry. But other than that, it's they can pretty much let everybody go unrestricted, unless they want to keep them for reserve pieces, because everybody was trash. You were pretty much going in. Nick Caserio was pretty much, again, these were bargain bin pieces to fill out what was supposed to look like a roster. And obviously it didn't. So pretty much for the Texans, what they need to address in this offseason is pretty much everything. Everything. They badly need 2 top receivers, and a tight end. Pretty much a whole offense. Like, they need receivers, a tight end, the rest of the offensive line to help out Laramie Tunzel and Kayron Green. And then looking at the defense, they need a starting corner opposite Derek Stingley Jr., an inside linebacker, and help for Jerry Hughes, Jonathan Greenard, and Malik Collins on that defensive line, at least in terms of depth. So they need just about everything. On that roster, because those bargain bins didn't do shit for them. And then the other important thing for the Houston Texans is that, what are you going to do at quarterback? Do you want to stick with Davis Mills for another year, or do you want to use the second overall pick to get a quarterback? Because whatever the Bears do with the number 1 overall pick will obviously be a contributing factor on what the Texans will do with the second overall pick. I mean, granted, they will go for a quarterback. It's just a matter of which one. Are they going to go for a CJ Stroud? Are they going to go for a Bryce Young? It's just a matter of who's available by then. Assuming that not another team that has traded up to the number 1 overall pick has gotten the quarterback that the Texans were looking at. So for the Texans, they have to decide whether to stick with Davis Mills or grab, at least for another year, or use that number 2 overall pick to get the second best or the best prospect that's left in the NFL draft. So overall, I mean, we knew the Texans were going to be shit in 2022. We all knew they were going to be crap. But I will say, if they can be this competent, if they can be competent enough this offseason, however they use it, there can be a little bit of hope in this organization, and a little bit of hope in the fan base that they have. They do it right, the McNair family can build towards a brighter tomorrow. If they do it all wrong in years past, well, expect a never-ending road of misery. Our next team on this list is the Arizona Cardinals. I'll start by saying this. I'll pose a question. Do we all remember that 7-0 start that Kyle Murray and Cliff Kingsbury had in 2021? I do. And do we all remember that 4-6 end to the season that they had? And then they got boat raced in the playoffs on national television on a Monday night. I certainly did. Well, it was another edition of Cliff Kingsbury's late season chokes, the second straight one that the Cardinals were trying to avoid in 2022. But the problem was they didn't do much in free agency due to the limited salary. They also lost DeAndre Hopkins to a 6-game suspension for violating an NFL performance-enhancing drug policy. And, well, to try and compensate that, they got receiver Marquise Hollywood Brown during the 2022 NFL draft from the Ravens. And then to try and compensate that even further, Kyler Murray and Kingsbury were rewarded for their success from the last couple of seasons with big fat contract extensions during the offseason. And Murray got an even fatter one. And we all remember the notable homework clause that was originally in there. Because, well, there are all those reports of Kyler Murray not taking his shit seriously and him playing Call of Duty all the damn time. So even then, everyone was just, simply expecting. My grand point is everyone was simply expecting whether or not Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury were once again, like they did the last 2 years, going to choke again late in the season after a good run, a good start to the season. All safe to say that we didn't even have to wait till the end of the season, the late second half of the season for that to happen, because it happened at the start of the season. So it happened well throughout the season, because the Cardinals were very inconsistent from the jump. I mean, Kyler Murray was, typical Kyler Murray. Find it, evading pressure out of the pocket, use his legs to extend plays. Decision making, though, was very often iffy. It didn't help that Murray was missing his top receiver in DeAndre Hopkins, sure. And third man, Rondale Moore, nursed a hamstring injury for a good amount of games. And he's still trying to establish something with Marquise Hollywood Brown. But still, it felt like Arizona lost a good amount of its identity as an air raid aggressive offense. Not only that, it didn't help that the injuries began to pile up all season long. Starting center Rodney Hudson played 4 games, but eventually got placed on injured reserve. Rondale Moore, again, only played 8 games before being placed on injured reserve in December. Starting safety Budda Baker and corner Byron Murphy also missed the last few games of the season. Zach Ertz tore his ACL in Week 10. Most notably, Kyler Murray tore his ACL and MCL in Week 14. And backup Colt McCoy also missed time late in the season due to concussion. Never got out of the concussion protocol. So, yeah, they were also very injury-riddled throughout the season. But even with all the injuries piling up late in the season, or as inconsistent as the offense was, sometimes they would do, sometimes they do pretty bad. They went, like Murray would often miss his receivers. Murray would turn the ball over. But then you'd have moments like where Murray led like this crazy comeback against the Raiders. And then the next week, he wouldn't show up against the Rams. But even after all the injuries were piling up late in the season, the Cardinals were still cutting it close in their final few games of the season. But it was the coaching decisions of Kingsbury, along with the limitations of what they had during that portion, that undid them. I will say, the one positive of Arizona's season was that defensive end J.J. Watt at least got to have a solid impact in his final 2 games against the Bucs and the 49ers. Yes, J.J. Watt decided he was going to retire at the end of the season. But still, Arizona finished with a very disappointing 4-13. And yeah, well, it was a very disappointing one, mainly due to injuries, mainly due to the inconsistency of the offense. At least it led to something more positive. The Cardinals finally fired Cliff Kingsbury, even though it should have happened after they lost in embarrassing fashion against the Rams. At least they finally got it done. I'm just glad. It finally got through. But whether they found the right replacements, it's still to be determined by how they do in the offseason. They found their new general manager in Monty Ossenfort. Why they get a new GM? Because Steve Keim, the other general manager, went on a personal leave late in the season, and then he eventually resigned. Ossenfort was a longtime scout for the New England Patriots. He last served as a director of player personnel for the Tennessee Titans. So this will be his first general manager job. So he at least kind of has some experience for a Super Bowl champion. And then replacing Cliff Kingsbury as head coach is former defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, Jonathan Gannon, who was hired just 2 days after a Super Bowl appearance. But just keep in mind, though, his touted defense, his top-ranked passing defense, got torched by Patrick Mahomes. But then again, it was Patrick Mahomes. So these two are coming into what's going to be interesting offseason. Kyler Murray, I'm not sure how his recovery is going to be with the torn ACL, but I think looking back at Carson Wentz, I mean, it's not a fair comparison per se, but I'm just saying that when Carson Wentz tore his ACL in Week 14 of 2017 against the Rams, he didn't come back until I think it was Week 3 of the 2018 season. Murray tore it in Week 14 against the Patriots. So I imagine a similar timeline is in order. But again, people recover in different ways. So it still is kind of imperative that the Cardinals kind of plan towards Murray being out at least the first 2 or 3 games of the season. So the problem is, though, they don't really have much cap space to work with. They have around $13 million, which is kind of modest, but still have some key things to address. Some of your free agents to look out for is defensive end Zach Allen, a kind of a key piece in the pass rushing rotation in 2022, along with J.J. Watt, corner Byron Murphy's a free agent, kicker Matt Prater, and punter Andy Lee. So pretty much your whole special teams unit right there. Some of the things that you need to address this offseason is mainly the defense. Because last year's free agency loss of edge rusher Chandler Jones, it left the pass rush something to be desired. Sure, J.J. Watt went on a good run late in the season, and Zach Allen was solid, but they didn't really have much help on the interior. So they could certainly use some help when it comes to interior rushers. And Zach Allen's set to be a free agent, and I think Arizona can sign him to a decent deal, and maybe potentially get a big name on the market. But who knows? They mostly have their starters intact, but they should add some depth with a lot of help. A lot of them heading for free agency. And then they should find a backup quarterback for Colt McCoy until Kyler Murray is healthy enough to return. So, like I said, it seems like Kyler Murray should be coming back around week 3 or 4 of next season, if the math is correct. But in the meantime, Colt McCoy is going to be running the offense for the first few games of the season. And if he gets hurt again, Arizona should want to sign someone at least reliable. Maybe draft somebody in the much later rounds of the draft, depending on what they have in store, because their third or fourth string quarterbacks in Trace McSorley and whoever it was we played against, the Niners played against Arizona in the last game of the season. It didn't look good. It didn't look good. So for Arizona, yeah, they finally ended the Cliff Kingsbury reign of terror. Maybe a year too late. I don't know, but it's finally over for them. But now we get to at least see Kyler Murray. What can he do under a new head coach? It might have to wait a couple of games, though, because, still recovering from the torn ACL. But that coach in Jonathan Gannon is going to be facing that early challenge. Obviously, he has to restock on his defense. He's also going to have to retool his offense on what's going to be at least the first 3 weeks of the season in this fall. It's a new dawn in the desert. Let's see how the Cardinals handle this offseason in terms of adjusting to at least a few weeks without Kyler Murray in the regular season this fall. If the wings spread or if they further die for the Redbirds in Arizona. So now let's talk about the team that had a very, very bad and very also interesting season, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. So when I talked about the Indianapolis Colts in my preview in last year in July, a lot of their 2022 was going to be dependent on how newly traded quarterback Matt Ryan performed. You already had most of the team coming back from 2021. It was just a matter of who's going to be the quarterback, because you shipped off Carson Wentz to the Washington Commanders, and we all know how their season ended last year when they had a playoff opportunity on the line. So you're going into 2022 seeing how Matt Ryan could do on a new team. And not only that, it seemed like it looked poised for the taking that they could potentially usurp, at least somewhat kind of surpass the Tennessee Titans as, at least for this season, the team to beat in the AFC South. And I think I predicted them to do just that in 2022. Boy, was I wrong about that. Boy, was I absolutely wrong about this one, like by a long mile. Because the team vastly underperformed with Matt Ryan under center from the very start. From game 1 against the Houston Texans. Why is that? Well, because opposing defenses easily focused on Jonathan Taylor, their top running back, and that made the offense very one-dimensional. It forced Matt Ryan, who looked like cooked. He looked washed. I'm sorry to say it. He He couldn't move. He could barely move around the pocket. He was turning the ball over more frequently than usual, and he was under duress a lot. He ate so many sacks, mainly due to the underwhelming offensive line. So the Indianapolis Colts were underwhelming so bad. Ryan was having a very disappointing year. Very disappointing first couple of games of the season. He was getting benched after a Week 7 game against the Tennessee Titans. Frank Reich, the head coach, would make one last pull, one last desperation play. That saw Sam Ellinger, the backup, start what ended up being Frank Reich's last game before he ended up getting fired after they were hammered by the New England Patriots in Week 9. So my question was, like, you had Nick Foles on the roster. Why didn't you start Nick Foles? Nick Fails, Fails. It's like you had Nick Foles there too with Matt Ryan. Like, why didn't you start Nick Fails? I don't know this team, man. So anyway, you fired Frank Reich mid-season, even though his coaching, it wasn't great, but you didn't really have a quarterback to work with. The offensive line was really underperforming. But rather than replace Frank Reich with someone on his staff, owner Jim Irsay did something really out of the box. It actually made for some interesting TV. He instead hired someone with absolutely no head coaching experience. So he pretty much did what the Texans almost did in last year's offseason. He hired a head coach with none experience whatsoever. He hired ESPN analyst Jeff Saturday. Yes, that is right. Former Indianapolis Colts offensive lineman Jeff Saturday. So everyone was shocked. Everyone was appalled. Even everyone at ESPN, Jeff Saturday's coworkers were shocked by this. They were kind of supportive, but they were disappointed by the Colts for doing this kind of move. But I mean, hey, the Colts somehow managed to win their next game against the Raiders. That was kind of more so of the Raiders embarrassing themselves. But unsurprisingly, they lost the rest of their games, including giving up the largest lead in NFL regular season history against the Minnesota Vikings, 33-0, which also included Matt Ryan participating in. That is so sad to have Matt Ryan be a part of two of the largest blown leads in not just Super Bowl history, but now regular season history. Like, that is so sad, dude. So Nick Fails would start the final 3 games of the regular season, but not even he could make the offense manageable. And the Colts would finish 4-12-1. Man, that is just sad to see. So at least for the Colts, they put themselves in position for a top 4 pick in the NFL draft. But do you really expect general manager Chris Ballard to actually do something reliable with that pick? We'll see. And I don't know if they picked the right head coach in former Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen. I mean, he did work with Jalen Hurts, a MVP candidate. But then again, we don't know how he'll translate from a coordinator to a head coach. He had a decade of offensive coaching experience with working with Phillip Rivers, Justin Herbert, and again, Jalen Hurts. But this is his first head coaching gig. Going from coordinator to head coach is a lot different. But hey, I guess it's kind of a slight improvement over Jeff Saturday. I almost chose Jeff Saturday to be the permanent head coach. Like, good God. So at least they kind of got a decent choice. But expectations are already high for Steichen because Jim Irsay gave him a big fat contract, a 6-year contract. Like, what is it with these first time head coaches getting big fat contracts for their rebuild? Like, damn. And they don't even have that much money to work with it to start off this kind of rebuild ish. $11 million. Not a lot to spend there. But they can actually get a good chunk. They can add on to it a good amount of it to add on, because the team can get an additional 17 million by releasing Matt Ryan, or if Matt Ryan retires. So if Matt Ryan retires or the Colts release him, they get $17 million, and they'll get around like at least 28 million. They can also save an additional 14 million by releasing Ryan Kelly and slot corner Kenny Moore. They can find replacements for both of those guys anyway. Looking at some of your key free agents for the Colts, defensive end Yannick Ngakoue, who was a trade piece from the Raiders last year, and free safety Rodney McLeod. So not too many key free agents. I'm not sure if the Colts will want to re-sign them back. Either way, if they don't, they can always find replacements for them. Not too significant. So looking at some of their needs to address, obviously the biggest need for the Colts, just like it was last year, is a freaking quarterback. You're in prime position to pick a quarterback in the NFL draft. You're picking number 4 overall. You have a prime opportunity to pick the second best prospect. Wherever the Texans don't pick, you can get the next best thing. Their draft strategy should be getting a quarterback of the future. Whether it's CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or whatever the next best quarterback is. They cycled through several different quarterbacks in the last 5 years after Andrew Luck retired, and none of them worked. It's time to settle on something long-term. Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard, wake the fuck up. It's time to settle on something long-term. Get your head out of your ass. Now, obviously, a lot of it will depend on when in the top 4 they will address it, because of what Chicago does with the number 1 overall pick, and whether or not the Colts want to trade up and get their guy right away. Either way, their main focus has to be on getting a quarterback locked in for the future. Not after the draft, not before the draft, but the veteran quarterback in the NFL draft. And then you use the other remaining picks of your draft to build around that future quarterback. Once they acquired the quarterback, they can use the rest of their picks to address supporting him, getting another receiver alongside Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, getting a center, getting a couple more tackles along the exterior, maybe even getting a guard. So you got to address pretty much the whole offense this whole draft. Maybe getting a couple of more depth at corner and linebacker too could help. It could go a long way. So for the Colts, their disastrous 2022, and stupid as well, as anyone could have imagined, it can help them depending on how Jim Irsay handles it. I mean, he has no one to blame but himself for the mess that he caused. And for whatever reason, he elected to keep Chris Ballard along as general manager, even though his assembly of a roster is part of the reason why the Colts are in this big mess. Why didn't Jim Irsay fire Chris Ballard alongside when he fired Frank Reich mid-season? Or why didn't he even fire Chris Ballard at the end of the season? It doesn't make any sense. So, well, the past is in the past now, but this is Chris Ballard's last chance to Avengers assemble a competent roster, and he may have attained what we don't know yet, a competent head coach for now that seems to know what he's doing. So all I'll say is that if the Colts roster that shows up on opening day next season resembles the one that's either this bad as it was in 2022 or somehow even worse than the one that presented itself this year, or this past year at least, then honestly, I don't know when the Colts are going to wake the hell up. Maybe they won't even ever. The horseshoe will just stay flat in the face on its sand forever and ever. Amen. So the next team on our season recap part 1 is a team that I was actually looking forward to talking about. Probably the most interesting team on this list for when it came to season recaps, and that is none other than the Denver Broncos. Now, why do I say most interesting? Because we clearly have a lot more teams to talk about when it came to interesting seasons, and I'm going to probably say the term interesting a lot, but the Denver Broncos in 2022 were a very interesting case because obviously when you make a big time offseason trade like Denver did last year in the offseason, when you go out and get a quarterback from the Seattle Seahawks in Russell Wilson, you give up a big haul to bring him into the Mile High. It seemed like all of your quarterback woes since Peyton Manning retired after Super Bowl 50 were finally going to be resolved because you're bringing Russell Wilson to complement an offense that seemed like it had a really good core with running backs Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams and a receiving core led by Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, and what Russell Wilson was lacking in Seattle, a good offensive line, good protection. And on the other side, you still have that strong defense from 2021. And then you added even more with the likes of Randy Reed Gregory in the pass rush and defensive tackle DJ Jones and K'Wan Williams in the secondary. So it seemed like, with all those additions, and of course, especially Russell Wilson, and you got a new head coach in Nathaniel Hackett from the Green Bay Packers, in his time as an offensive coordinator, it seemed like the Broncos were going to be well equipped to challenge the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC West. Probably be the biggest challenger to the Chiefs in the division. And then the regular season came. And all I could say about the Broncos all season long, I guess it could be described in 7 words. Yep, just 7 simple words. That's not what he wanted to cook. Let me just say this. It was a little bit more understandable that Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett, they're still experiencing a little bit of growing pains when it came to the first regular season game. Ironically, that first regular season game was, interestingly enough, in Seattle. Russell Wilson's immediate return to Seattle against the Seahawks. Obviously, not getting that standing ovation, getting that Kevin Durant-like return to the Thunder when he was with the Warriors. Russell Wilson kind of got that similar treatment when he came back to Seattle on that Monday night to close out week 1. And then the game happened, and it ended up being a prelude for what was to come for the rest of the season. Questionable coaching, bad clock management, and a stagnating offense. Now, granted, the stagnating offense didn't really happen until a little bit later in the fourth quarter, but those early quarters, there was a little bit of sign of hope with that Russell Wilson-led offense in Denver. But then the stagnating offense, started to carry over in the fourth quarter. And then it immediately come into full display afterwards in very uninspiring wins over the Houston Texans and the San Francisco 49ers. And by God, that week 3 game against the 49ers was absolutely putrid football. Because it looked like Russell Wilson trying to run the offense like he did in Seattle, but he ended up looking like a scared little punk that didn't want to throw the football, that didn't want to throw it to the likes of Cortland Sutton, because Sutton was his top receiver that he only trusted in not knowing that Jerry Jeudy was also a good receiver, even against weak-ass defenses. And it also became clear that head coach Nathaniel Hackett was well over in his head with these weirdly designed plays and going to the wrong running back. That's not Javonte Williams. And these, again, going back to those play designs that Wilson didn't do in Seattle. And for Nathaniel Hackett, he couldn't adjust to certain situations and regress back to those questionable coaching decisions that haunted him in that week 1 game against Seattle. Positively, though, the defense, as it was a year prior, became and remained the team's biggest strength. DJ Jones and linebacker Randy Gregory were a strong pass rushing unit despite The team trading away Bradley Chubb, the linebacker, at the trade deadline. And even though they lost corner Ronald Darby to a torn ACL early in the season, the secondary, still a strong unit. In takeaways and passes deflected, headlined by a strong safety, Kareem Jackson, and corners, Patrick Surtain II and K'Wan Williams. But, for as strong as a defense as you have, obviously, in the name of the game of the NFL today, offenses win you games. And Denver, for as big of an offseason as they had last year, they came into that regular season massively underperforming, massively disappointing. So they went on to lose 7 of their final 9 games after the bye week because why? That offense. Everyone thought they would turn the corner, but they still couldn't do jack shit. They still couldn't score a blind eye. Russell Wilson still played like a deer in the headlights, and they had no running game because, Javonte Williams actually was injured. He tore his ACL in week 5 against the Colts, and Melvin Gordon kept fumbling the ball, kept turning the ball over, and he ended up getting released. So yet there was no running game. There was literally no offense to speak of because Russell Wilson was struggling that much. So it was bad. It was really bad for Denver. And to top it all off, Nathaniel Hackett was finally fired the day after Christmas after Denver got mollywopped so bad by scrubs on the LA Rams. Yes, it took the Rams scrubs to embarrass the Denver Broncos that bad. And it also took Patrick Starr, yes, Patrick Starr, roasting Russell Wilson for the Denver front office and the Walmart ownership group to finally show Nathaniel the Hackett the door. Yes, Nathaniel Hackett wasn't fired earlier than that. No, it took Patrick Starr. It took a talking starfish roasting Russell Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett on Christmas Day to have the Denver ownership group finally show Hackett the Nathaniel the door. That's not what he wanted to cook. At least he's gone. At least he's gone. I mean, obviously it sucks to see people fired and all that, but when you're not doing your job and doing it well, sorry, you have to go. So Hackett's senior assistant, Jerry Rosberg, took over as interim head coach. And the Broncos, kind of looked more energetic on offense, especially Russell Wilson. You kind of saw what the Denver offense, could have looked like all season long. And it took them the very last game against the Chargers to score more than 30 points. They looked, like I said, they had more life in that offense. But in the end, it was just a very disappointing season for Denver. And that's why they're the most disappointing team in the NFL 2022 season. Underachieving with all that talent in the biggest way possible. Now, questions are rightfully abound about Russell Wilson and whether or not he's assistant quarterback of Seattle and Pete Carroll. But I would hold that off until I give it at least next season and perhaps even the next, because Denver actually managed to hire Sean Payton, former New Orleans Saints head coach, as its next head coach. No, not Kevin James. Not Kevin James as its next head coach. I wish we all did. But, they actually hired Sean Payton as that head coach. But they did have to give up yet another crap ton of draft capital to acquire his services. But at least, unlike Nathaniel Hackett, he is a proven commodity offensively. He has worked with Drew Brees. Let's see what he can do with Russell Wilson. If Payton doesn't end up being the answer that Denver is seeking at head coach and Russell Wilson, then I don't know what is. And then we will know that answer of whether or not Russell Wilson was just a system quarterback. So now Denver has another big offseason ahead of them. Now that they have what could be a proper head coach for Russell Wilson, now they have to kind of build around that offense, kind of retool a little bit. They have a little bit of money, but not that much. They have about $11 million to spend. Not too many key free agents to keep track of, because the only two that the Denver may be willing to keep around are defensive end Draymond Jones and strong safety Kareem Jackson. Maybe they do want to keep them around. Who knows? Maybe use a franchise tag. We'll see. There are a couple of things to address in the offseason. Like, they could certainly use some more help at running back behind Javonte Williams. It was just a shame that he went down to the torn ACL in week 5, because before that, he was getting the full load. And then Daniel Hackett decided to dick around with the running back position, because, well, he decided to keep going with Melvin Gordon, even though he had serious issues with the protecting the football. And then when Melvin Gordon got released, because of that, they used a committee of Latavius Murray, Chase Edmonds, and then Tyler Beatty, which didn't really work all that well. But Denver should have its starting running back in Javonte Williams back, but they got to make sure they have a few reliable backups to fill in just in case he gets hurt, and, to keep him fresh on the field. They could always retool the offensive line. It was okay in 2022, but it never hurts to get some help for Russell Wilson to keep him upright. He's always a big advocate and usually adamant about having a good offensive line. And added another edge rusher or two in the defensive line. The pass rush, it's still pretty solid, but long term, you can't always have Randy Gregory going after the quarterback, and you can't always have just him and DJ Jones going straight after the quarterback. You got to get some help for them. Fortunately for them, this free agency class is loaded with names like Marcus Davenport, Brandon Graham, Justin Houston, Jadeveon Clowney at edge in the pass rushing community. So, they can get some of those names, whether it's in the bargain bin or if they can free up some cap space, maybe get one of those big names. So the Broncos at least admitted that the Daniel Hackett experience was a Hackett of a failure. But now this new ownership group and Sean Payne, the head coach, now has to prove that they can undo what was Hacketted in the last year. That all starts with free agency. And if they can restructure a few contracts and address some of their key needs in their organization, then I think Denver, in my opinion, should be on track to earning back some respect next season. If not, then we'll probably see a lot more of their roasting that they'll absolutely deserve, like they did this past season.
That's not what he wanted to cook.
So our final team that we're going to be talking about today in part 1 of our NFL 2022 season recaps is another interesting case. Not as interesting as the last team that we just talked about in the Denver Broncos, but this team was the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champions from Super Bowl 56, and that is, of course, the Los Angeles Rams. So for the Rams, they were coming in having every right to be the utmost confident because, well, like I said, they were the reigning, defending, undisputed Super Bowl champions of Super Bowl 56. But, in free agency, they were tight on money. They were tight on draft picks. And as such, they lost a couple of key players like left tackle Andrew Whitworth, who retired a champion. And they lost a couple pieces in free agency. The most notable one being linebacker Von Miller to the Buffalo Bills in the offseason. But despite all that, the Rams had a good shot at the time to repeat. And that's how I kind of saw it because of how weak the NFC was shaping up to be. You had a lot of uncertainty at quarterback. There were a lot of teams that didn't really feel like playoff contenders going into the season. There were only a few teams that felt like they can really compete in the playoffs and make a deep run at the Super Bowl at the time. The Rams were one of them. So, despite all the losses in free agency that the Rams had, they still had a good shot at winning the division and maybe making another run at a title. boy, were we wrong about that. Were we really wrong about that one? Because from opening night, things kind of to spiral slowly but surely. Opening night for the Super Bowl champions was a complete disaster. The losses of Andrew Whitworth and guard Austin Colbert to the Panthers made the offensive line a shell of its former self. They couldn't pass protect. It allowed relentless pressure from the Bills, and Matthew Stafford got sacked 7 times. And they lost big. The worst loss by a defending Super Bowl champion on opening night, as they got blown out by the Bills. But the Rams were able to bounce back with 2 straight wins over the Falcons and the Cardinals. But those 2 teams weren't that great. But they were undone by only winning 3 more games after that. So for the Rams, it wasn't that great of a season for them. But a lot of that had to contribute to a lot of things. Defensively, the pass rush was pretty much back to where it was prior to getting Von Miller last season. Aaron Donald was back to being a one-man crew, and by doubling him, there was pretty much no one else to help him out. No one else to pretty much rush the passer, per se. Jalen Ramsey was still one of the best shutdown corners in the NFL, but there's no one else opposite of him. And, well, yes, I think Kobe Durant at the other corner position was, I think he was 50-50. He still has room to grow. I think he has some solid room to grow as a rookie. So maybe give him maybe another year, and maybe find someone else to compete with him is a need for the Rams. But linebacker Bobby Wagner performed pretty well in his first season with the Rams in the pass rush and in coverage in the middle of the field, having a Pro Bowl kind of year. Offensively, though, that's where things start to completely spiral out of control. The offensive line underwent multiple different combinations, primarily due to injuries and just simply trying to get something to work, especially when you lost like 2 key linemen in Whitworth and Corbett. Center Brian Allen and tackle Rob Harvestine were okay, but like I said, it's hard to maintain consistency in the offensive line when you're trying to do so many different combinations. The Rams also severely lacked a running game. Like, there was like pretty much nothing with Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers, who the Rams were trying to trade at the deadline. They couldn't really net anything remotely positive for most of the season. Their big name receiving signing in the offseason, Allen Robinson, he was supposed to be the number 2 option because, well, Odell Beckham Jr., their big signing midseason last year, he tore his ACL and he wasn't expected to play all season. But like in Chicago with Allen Robinson, he massively disappointed. He was pretty much nowhere to be found. He's like a ghost in the passing game. And then you have top receiver Cooper Kupp. He remained the team's most reliable option, but he was lost for the season due to a high ankle sprain after week 10. So that was really unfortunate. It really took away pretty much the whole offense for the Rams. And then it took an even bigger blow with Matthew Stafford. He wouldn't do as well due to the lack of an offensive line, causing an uptick of him just eating the ball and being baited into turnovers. And he would just later go down as well, twice to concussions, and then eventually on IR with a spinal contusion. Backups John Wolford and Bryce Perkins couldn't move the needle in his place that Sean McVay desperately needed. But the Rams made one last gasp as their season wore on. They claimed Baker Mayfield, who was released by the Panthers off waivers just before their Thursday night. Was it week 13? I think it's week 14. It was a December Thursday night game against the Raiders, and Mayfield would lead a comeback win over Vegas. But they didn't really do much after that other than a Christmas Day blowout win over Denver that netted Mayfield a Christmas MVP and got Nathaniel Hackett fired. But other than that, in between, Mayfield was as inconsistent as he was during his time in Carolina. Even with the scrubs the Rams had left. So all in all, the Rams limped to becoming the all-time worst Super Bowl champions ever at 5-12, surpassing the 1999 Denver Broncos. But I mean, hey, the ring is the most important thing, and this is coming from a Niners fan. At least they have the championship, even though they pretty much blew their load with the money, blew their load with the draft picks, like trading for all these pieces. But I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you have a very recent Super Bowl championship. I mean, like, I can't talk as a Niners fan. I can't talk shit that much about y'all. You didn't make the playoffs, but you have the ring at the end of the day. You have the championship. So what did we Niners fans get? Oh yeah, we made the playoffs, but again, we didn't come to our ultimate goal, which was winning the Super Bowl. And yeah, it is what it is. So for the Rams, though, you do have a crap ton of questions to address in the offseason, but you're going to have to do so already being in the negative in terms of salary cap. You have to figure out how to get back into the green because you have like negative 15 million. You're like over the cap. You're like over $15 million in like negative cap space. So you got to figure out who you're going to restructure, which contracts to restructure. I imagine it's going to be Matthew Stafford or Cooper Kupp, or maybe even Aaron Donald. But either way, you got to figure out how to get back under the cap. The good thing for the Rams is they're getting Sean McVay is coming back, so that's always a good thing for them. Look at some of your key unrestricted free agents. Pretty much it's your whole special teams unit, like kicker Matt Gay, punter Riley Dixon, corner Troy Hill, and perhaps their most important free agent, unrestricted, is probably Baker Mayfield at quarterback. Because I think, Matthew Stafford's probably gonna play again in 2023, but it's never an issue, to have Baker Mayfield as an insurance option, I guess. In the event that, maybe he wants to spend another year as a backup to Stafford, get some, maybe learn a valuable lesson, or something. So maybe that's something the Rams want to address in the offseason. Does Baker Mayfield want to re-sign with LA on a cheap deal? Do the Rams want him back, even as a backup? And vice versa. That's the thing that the Rams have to decide. And the Rams should revamp the offensive line. They could really use a left tackle to replace the void left by Andrew Whitworth. They could also use 2 more guards to come in and compete with the ones currently on the roster. They have to find the protection needed to protect the quarterback. They can't have Matthew Stafford, or if it's going to be somebody else, but it is going to be Stafford. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm just giving hypotheticals. You can't have Matthew Stafford running for his life and getting so many sacks because your offensive line couldn't pass protect. You have to use this offseason, even with the little amount of cap space you may have, and they do have some of draft picks. You have to use all your resources to invest in the offensive line. And perhaps also find Aaron Donald some help in the pass rush. As mentioned already, the Rams already reverted back to where they already were prior to getting Von Miller. And Aaron Donald's back to being a one-man wrecking crew, unless you're doubling him. So they need someone either right next to him in the interior or someone opposite of him on the other edge to help ease some of that pressure off of him in the pass rush. Because he ain't any younger, So you want to help him out. So the good thing for the Rams is that at least half or most of their roster is already locked up into deals. There aren't many decisions to be made in free agency. Sean McVay is coming back as head coach, so they don't have to worry about him retiring, going to broadcasting and all that, at least for this coming year in September. They should be able to address most of their needs through the draft. This year they'll have a second round pick compared to last year where they blew their load and then they had to wait till late in the third round to start drafting shit. So at least this year, they'll have a solid amount of picks this time around. And in free agency, they'll probably have to like restructure some contracts to get something going. They also hope to have Matthew Stafford back for the offseason when the offseason program starts. And if he's healthy enough to do it. And well, like I said, obviously it's not the season the Rams are hoping for in terms of defending their Super Bowl title. But if they can avoid the injury bug to its starters and address the offensive line, most importantly, then perhaps the Rams can get back to competing in the NFC West and perhaps competing for a playoff spot in the NFC. So that is it for part 1 of our 2022 NFL season recaps here on Very Cold Lasagna, episode number 132. What did y'all think about all the 6 teams that we talked about here today on this episode? We talked about the Chicago Bears, the Houston Texans, the Arizona Cardinals, the Indianapolis Colts, the Denver Broncos, and the Los Angeles Rams. All those teams, those unfortunate citizens down in the dumpster fire that is Dumpsterville. Let me know if you're a fan of these teams. Let me know how they personally did in your eyes. Whether it's a comment on YouTube or a message on social media, I'm at Very Cold Lasagna on social media, on Twitter and Instagram. Send me a message there. I'd like to know your thoughts on this episode. So anyway, that's the end of part 1. We got about 25 more teams to go and a whole lot of more stories to tell on these teams that is to come. So anyway, this is DylanLasagna of Very Cold Lasagna. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 132 of this icy yet spicy podcast. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And until the next episode, peace out.